Hi, I'm Kerry, and this is The Vietnam War by Geoffrey Wawro, which just came out last year. And it has to be, I would say, the best military history I've read in a very long time, and certainly the best I've ever read about the Vietnam War. And what makes it special is the tone of barely contained fury and outrage by the author, which is not to say that it's takes the form of an editorial. This is a seriously researched piece of military history. But what Wawro makes very clear is that from the earliest stages of the Vietnam conflict in the early 1960s, well before American troop strength had escalated to over 500,000, the Pentagon and top American and people like John Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson knew full well that the war was unwinnable. The most they could really hope for was to have some kind of draw whereby they could take out American troops and hope that the South Vietnamese government could stumble on for a few years. It was very cynical view of the war, and Wawro shows in excruciating detail how corrupt and incompetent the South Vietnamese government was. There was really no chance that the Americans dealing with this government could have hoped for any other outcome. And although they sponsored one coup to get into the last and final, the final South Vietnamese president, he was no improvement over anyone who had come before. In addition, the Americans knew they were facing a determined North Vietnamese army that would continually be replenished thanks to a fairly high birth rate, no matter what kind of losses they endured. And they were also highly motivated. And again, what Wawro shows in great detail is the problem as the years went by with the American forces is that they became thoroughly demoralized as the average soldier on the ground began to realize this was not a war that their government was interested in winning. They were only looking for some kind of a stalemate so they could then turn around and leave Vietnam. And so why die for something like that? And the fighting ability of American troops in the late 60s and into the last 2 years of the war, in the early 70s, declined rapidly, both in numbers and in willingness to fight. And this is the period during which fragging of overambitious and bloodthirsty officers came to be a serious problem. Now, as good as it is, there's one thing I thought was an omission, and that is throughout the book, he mentions how both LBJ and Nixon could rely on both Republican and Democrat congressmen and senators to continually vote to extend and expand the war up to a point. By the 1969, Congress was beginning to rein the president in. But prior to that, Wawro just makes the point or says that there was a variety of hawkish politicians who were, of course, interested in fighting communism. I think that's part of the story, but the other, of course, is that this war, which ended up costing somewhere north of $150 billion, which in today's dollars, Wawro says was would equal close to $1 trillion, was immensely profitable for a wide variety of military contractors and construction companies. And of course, they would be in the ear of their local congressmen, senators, telling them, yes, you should go on voting to expand this war. For an example, Bell Helicopters produced 16,000 helicopters, the famous Huey, for the Vietnam War. That the amount of profit involved in that is hard to imagine. In addition, a great many of these congressional districts and states would be relying on jobs for people in these armament industries and so on. So as much as they may have been some politicians may have been hawkish, they were also very self-interested because, of course, often when they left their jobs in politics, They would have cushy jobs as lobbyists or on the board of directors of the same companies that have been filling their pockets with campaign funds. So that's an angle that isn't explored in the book, and I would have liked to have seen it touched upon at least. Otherwise, it is superb. And here to advertise my own book, noir novel, The Skeleton Palm, set in California and Las Vegas. Very dark, very violent. You are warned. Please give it a read if you can. See you next time.